any, we had a written submission, I believe. He was done for staging and fined, and he was able to put a written submission. Have you got the outcome on that and how that's played out for Shaun?
Yeah, he's been cleared of that. Yeah, he had a whiplash issue. That's yeah. I won't pass judgment on that, except to say that we agree with the decision.
It's been quite a long break for you guys. It's unusual to have this long of a break. Did you give the players extra time off, or have you sort of leave them alone for a couple of days leading into Richmond?
Yeah, a bit of both. It was a slightly more challenging trip to Perth than it usually is, given the restrictions that we were under over there. So it was opportune for us to get back the next day and then have a bit of time for the players to rest and rejuvenate. And then we pretty much have gone back into a normal 7-day preparation for this game. So we think we'll go in quite prepared.
And I take it from the reports coming in the last couple of days ago, Rohan will be available. Is Rohan and Henderson likely to return as well?
Yeah, both those guys will be fine.
Chris, are you disappointed this game's not being played at GMHBA Stadium, or is it moving on from that?
No, we're moving on. I think in the current environment, there are plenty of examples of the AFL and the clubs needing to be ready to adjust on the fly. So I think the broader conversation into the future around where teams should play their home games is one, or is a conversation we should have in the future. I think even last week saw Richmond play a home game up in Queensland. In that context, it was pretty easy for us to move on really quickly.
In the long term, do you think that perhaps you should be able to play Richmond at GMHBA?
Oh, look, I think our club position's been really clearly stated for a long period of time, and we've attempted, I'm not sure how successfully, but we've attempted to broaden the conversation to every club in the competition. And said it before, we'll say it again. We feel strongly on behalf of every club in the competition that they should choose to play their 11 home games where they like. Can't be more consistent than that.
What was the rationale you were given by the AFL, Chris, as to why you couldn't get your wish?
You'd know better than I would, Mitch. I haven't really had any involvement in this at all. So I think Brian Cook has. I believe you spoke to him about it, and he got some sort of rationale that I didn't ask to be passed on to me. Once the decision was made, we moved on. Do you know?
No, that's why I asked the question. I haven't. Once it was made, I haven't asked.
You did write an article about it, though, so I'm assuming that you do have a bit of background about it. What's your interpretation of the game being in Melbourne?
Just that was as it was fixtured, so they've continued to stick with that, given other agreements in terms of signage and broadcast and all.
It's all a bit vague, is it?
Well, I'll ask you then. Were you surprised, given you said two Adelaide teams getting their games moved willy-nilly, that you couldn't have the same luxury this week?
I'd prefer to look at it more from the other side, which is we're in an environment where the AFL are in an impossible situation to try to manage everything, and if this is an issue that slips down the priority list, then I think all fair-minded people should be able to live with that, and that includes us.
Crowds may not be a factor come September. Do you expect the talk to start up again, and will the club try and push for a home final if you earn one?
Well, I think I've got to be careful. This is not a position that I want to be speaking about on behalf of the club. I think that's Brian Cook's and Craig Drummond's prerogative if they should so choose. But I think when we do casually remark on these issues, it implies that the clubs have some say. And I think there has been that implication over the last 18 months in particular, that with games being moved around, that the home team should have some say in where they play. That's not my understanding. So certainly when it comes to finals, that's slightly different in my view to home and away games, in that the AFL decide the fixture there. And the question should be directed at them, and they should explain their ethical framework for those situations. I don't think it's for the club to advocate on our own behalf. The AFL makes the decision. We get very, very, very little say, if any.
Chris, it's 3 weeks on since Jeremy Cameron got hurt. Can you give us any clarity around the time frame and how he's tracking? But hopefully, what's maybe more than halfway through his rehab.
Yeah, we're really confident he'll play before the end of the home and away season, and give him and us enough time to make sure that he's absolutely cherry ripe going to finals. That would be kind of the broad assumption based on where he is in his rehab. But as you know, the short-term day-to-day commentary around it is a risk, not because we'd be vague in our description, but more because it changes, and what was right one day could be wrong tomorrow. But very confident he'll play before the end of the home and away season.
Chris, is there a luxury there with that where you are on the ladder, and that you can give him a few extra weeks and don't need to rush you back, and given the issues you had at the start of the year?
Oh, gee, I wish I felt that we're in there, or agree with you that we had any luxuries at all. I still feel as if we're on the edge of our seats, fighting and scrapping for the best ladder position we can. But the challenge is always trying to park that anxiety and make a good decision, and even more than that, really trust in our medical and sports science staff, who I think have done an outstanding job this year. There's been a lot of examples that don't get any publicity where they've knocked it out of the park with their decision making. So I feel even more confident that we should trust in that plan and their decision making. And if we occasionally don't get a good outcome, it won't be through a lack of attention to detail.
You talk about that anxiousness and that scrambling to secure the best spot. Is that a product of, you talk about it often, the tightness of the competition, or also as well as you played against Fremantle, that you're still working towards your best?
Yeah, I think we're working towards our best, but living with anxiety is the lot of the modern day coach, I think. So just get used to being a little bit uncomfortable as best you can. I can't remember ever sitting in this position 3/4 of the way through the season thinking that we're exactly where we want to be and everything's going to be fine. But again, it doesn't mean it's not going to be fine. It just means that there's a lot of anxiety and cautiousness that needs to go into our day-to-day lives. But again, I think the good ones do that. Don't take anything for granted.
Do you think with the age demographic of your list this season, you're better equipped with more mature players to deal with what's going on and sort of the moving nature of the season?
It's hard to say because we don't really have any relativity there. We can sort of look from the outside on how other clubs might be handling it, but you never really know. So I think more than the age demographic of our list, it's the experience that we had last year that will hold us in good stead. Even last week, and we're not isolating ourselves to these sorts of situations, but when a few curveballs were thrown our way last week, I was really proud of the way that our playing group in particular and our wider club handled the news, adjusted to the situation, and was still able to perform. So that's probably, if we were to refer to any one part of our ability to handle these sort of situations, it's that previous experience that we'll draw on.
What do you hope from Reece Stanley this week, Chris? Obviously going up against Nankervis, can he sort of be the frontline big man that really can shape the final series for you?
Yeah, I think he can. I thought he was very good last week against one of the best ruckmen in the comp. Not only the best young ruckman, but Darcy's quite rightly in the conversation around the All-Australian position, and I thought Reece more than matched him, in particular in the centre bounces. And physically he's in good shape, and there's no reason to think that he can't be really good for us. But Nankervis coming back from them, certainly a bonus.
He's the biggest name in the comp probably, so how different is it approaching a game against Richmond without Dustin Martin going to be there?
There's two ways of looking at it for us. Trying to forecast what they would do. I guess our suspicion is that, given that they've been so successful with a really structured plan and operation over the last few years, that even though he's the best player in the comp, there will be another really good player who comes in and plays a similar role to him. So I think that's probably the likelihood that we'd sort of consider the guy playing that role to be as dangerous as Dustin Martin, and that's going to be a challenge for them because he's, as I said, the best player in the comp. Or we could take a different view, which I think would be a mistake, and that is to assume that they're going to be less potent without him. I think that they've shown over a long period of time that they can replace really, really high-level players with guys that can come in and do the job. So our expectation, even without him, is to continue the improvement that I think the whole competition's seen from them over the last week.
If it is that, Chris, and it is, I suppose, the former option you laid out there, would it be, given what we saw early in the season, would you prepare for it to be maybe Shea Bolton who fills that role?
Edwards is coming back into the team. I think Lambert's really stabilised them. So, yeah. And look, I think while I say that they're quite structured, they're not so structured that they don't let their best players play within their individual skill set. So, Bolton has quickly established himself as one of their best players. But again, I mean, I feel like I say this every week. If we're focused on a couple, then Cochin comes back into form and really hurts us. So we're full of respect for what they can deliver, and we're sort of casting a broad view across their best players and making sure that we're ready for whatever they bring. Because it's not a positive for them that Martin's going out, but it makes it more challenging for the opposition because you do need to guess a little bit as to what they're going to do without him.
It's 250 for Shaun Higgins this weekend, and only about a dozen of them have been in the hoops, but still, despite some early injuries, been a pretty fine career. And just seems in the last couple of weeks, he might have just found his mojo again.
Yeah, he has. He had some setbacks with us, thumb injury, which kept him out for a month, along with a hamstring, which was about a month as well. And that in concert with the fact that we asked him to play what can be a challenging role in the AFL system, that high half forward. It's really difficult to be a consistently good player in that position, especially when you're coming into a new system with new teammates. We're comfortable with his progression and really confident that he's going to be a good player for us. But going back even further than that, a guy who had some injury issues early in his career but was always a pretty obvious talent. I think the 250 milestone speaks to his resilience and his perseverance as much as his talent.
Do you have any update on Mitch Duncan's situation and in his timeline? Is he in line to play before the final series?
Bit harder to tell with Mitch as to whether he'll come good before the end of the home and away season, but we're supremely confident that he'll play this year. So that might depend on us being good enough week to week.
I think the Essendon in particular and a couple of other Victorian clubs are trying to get sort of practice matches and VFL up in the northern states. Is that an option at all for you down here, or is it those VFL guys are just limited to just training basically?
Josh, we have a few balls in the air there and we're trying to manage it as best we can, but I must admit that I'm a little bit out of the loop in terms of the AFL's directives on this and even further than that, the directives that the AFL are getting from the government. So I want to be careful that I don't say something that proves to be inaccurate down the track, but it's a challenge for every team. But again, we lived through it a bit last year. It's not perfect. We'd prefer to get game time into those guys. And if we have to rely on training, which again we consider ourselves very fortunate to be able to continue with, then I think, at least in a relative sense across the competition, that we'll be okay.
Chris, can I just ask you about in terms of the way we've seen exposure sites that didn't affect clubs this week? Obviously, the Giants Swans game and had club players and staff ruled out, and obviously Dogs and some other clubs have had players. Is there a sympathy there from you, or is it kind of more just we've just got to get on with the job and this is the way things go? No,
I'm extremely sympathetic for the situation those players and clubs find themselves in. I hesitate to say it's a lesson for us because as far as I know, those players haven't done anything wrong. So I think they've been desperately unlucky, and I suspect that all clubs will find themselves in a position for the rest of the year where they're a little bit unlucky. So our responsibility is to do everything we can to help the community and abide by the guidelines, as frustrating as it can be for some people. I still get the sense that we're close to the end of all this if we can come together and do the best we can. It doesn't feel like it right at the moment, I know, for most people, but I err on the side of being more sympathetic and empathetic for others' plights rather than wanting to point the finger.